Hey, what's up, everybody? Corey here from Armchair Rockstar. I was out running some errands today and thought we'd do a new video, try out some new gear. We've got a handy new mic made by Shure. In the car, I just shoot with an iPhone. At the house, I'm shooting with nice big DSLRs and stuff. But here in the car, we're just using the iPhone. So I got a serious mic upgrade for it that I hope will help our audio out considerably. But down to the important stuff. I thought we'd talk about another person who I feel is pretty underappreciated in the guitar world, and that is Alex Lifeson of Rush. Alex Lifeson is, I hesitate again with the word underappreciated. Amongst Rush fans, he is God. And while I might argue that God is a little much, I think he's a hell of a lot better player than what we hear about. When I think of Lifeson, I find myself thinking more about Rush's early days. Because I think in that era there was a lot more guitar-centric music, a little bit more riff-driven, before they got quite as experimental as they did sometimes later in the years. But he played very technical. He's a guy who was at least always felt to me like a pick-every-note player, not into the whole legato thing and hammer-ons and pull-offs, at least not to the extent that everyone else was at that time. But those early Rush albums, man, those were something special. Frankly, regardless of what instrument you're into, all of those guys are just beyond compare. So you look at those, though, and you don't think of Rush as a guitar rock band. You don't think of them as a drum band, even though they have arguably one of the greatest drummers to have ever walked the face of this earth sitting on a throne in the back of the stage. But they were. So many songs that just don't work without Alex Lifeson there. He has an interesting personality. He's kind of, I say he's quiet. He can be outgoing, but for the most part, he's a little quiet, a little more reserved, and we're really seeing that as a common theme in these videos. More often than not, the guys who are underappreciated are the guys who aren't swigging whiskey at center stage. They're the guys who aren't getting into all the trouble off stage. They're pretty much just normal Joes who love their music. It doesn't mean they're not great. It just means they don't find themselves, on the cover of Hit Parader back in the day or Circus Magazine, all of those. But don't let that cheapen what they've brought to the industry. And I say that about Alex Lifeson in particular because, Rush's early-ish prog rock, well, very early prog rock, actually, and what they were doing, most other bands just weren't. It just wasn't a thing. I mean, probably the closest stuff you could even compare it to would be, the really psychedelic Dead stuff, that's kind of a little deeper. But Rush's songs that are just straight hard rock and roll, man, those, you can't beat them. I mean, Free Will is possibly my favorite song ever. Spirit of Radio. Oh, that was all good. Temples of Syrinx. Oh, I love that. Tom Sawyer, of course. I even liked a lot of I'm going to call it their later stuff, but the truth is we're talking late 80s here, so it's more of the middle stuff. But Roll the Bones, that era. Roll the Bones was the first Rush album that was like my Rush album. Like, I had discovered them and heard a lot and listened to a lot. But Roll the Bones is the first one that I bought when it was new and just loved it. You know, I know it's not one of the critics' favorite Rush albums. It's a little more synthy and all that, but it's good tunes, man. Roll the Bones itself is just a great song, in my opinion. Now, the truth is, as far as the later stuff goes, I just never listened to it that much. I mean, I've heard some, but I never. It was never stuff I put in a car and just listened to for days on end, like the early to mid years were. One of the interesting things, though, about his style of playing, and this goes back to that whole pick every note thing I was saying about him earlier, is that Lifeson was very melodic. Most of his parts offered unique changes and transitions, out-of-the-box note selection, things like that, that, in my opinion, really set him apart. But in a way that makes him more of a guitar player's guitar player than a teenage girl's guitar player, if you know what I mean. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, we guitar players like our own style too. So, but there are things that, in my opinion, might not be appreciated by some people who haven't spent time as a musician themselves. And I think that is what hinders him a little bit in the public eye. You know, there's not going to be a pick slide and a dive bomb and trills for days, none of that stuff. It's just not who he is. It's not his style of play. And that's fine. Truth is, they're one of those bands that I so regret that I never got to see live. I would love to have been able to have seen Rush just once. One gig, that's all I need, but to have been able to check them off the list because they were a special unit as a band. They had the ability to both tell a story, share history, to just rock out and party as well. They kind of crossed all of those different wavelengths in the music world, and there aren't a lot of bands that do that. And that's something prog rock bands tend to do well. But usually they'll do two of those things well. I love John Petrucci as a person, as a player, but I cannot, for the life of me, fall in love with Dream Theater. I never have. Maybe I'm just not grabbing the right albums. I don't know. I didn't get into him back in the day. I've actually met Petrucci twice. Super nice fella. But I've never been a huge fan of the band. Where it's different with Rush. With Rush, they still had radio hits too. Where with Dream Theater, that's not so much the case. Styx had radio hits, yes. These bands had not just these giant collaborative prog epilogue albums. They also had songs that spoke to the masses. And I think it's good to kind of walk that line a little bit because you got to keep the lights on, And everybody has to start somewhere. And if your first album, you're just coming out, wailing into the tales of Edgar the Horrible or something, you're probably not going to sell the number of records and tickets that you need to, just like most bands. Think John Mayer, for example. You kind of got to go out and do what you have to do for a little while. That way you can get to do what you want to do later. And that's kind of how I think of John Mayer's career. But that's enough of that. I just wanted to take a minute to talk about Alex Lifeson because, he's credited and I think people respect him, but he's not a topic brought up very often. So I thought maybe we'll talk about him today and just see what we think. But that's about it. I appreciate everyone who's liking and following the channel. We have more than doubled subscribers in the last 7 days. And and pulled out around 20 plus thousand views in the last week, which is nuts because I am not used to those numbers. I've been trying to respond to every comment and push out on social, and it's really starting to come together. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything. If you don't hear from me again until then, Happy New Year's. Have fun, be safe, use your head, don't hurt anybody. You can have fun and be safe. I will be. So, I thank you all. Hope you have a great week. Let me know what you think about Alex Lifeson. Let's chat. See you later. Have a good one.